So Ryan Murphy really caught me by the throat because he's got a new show on Netflix, and this one's a little close to home. So, a little while back, I filmed a TikTok sharing my celebrity conspiracy theory that Ryan Murphy made a deal with the devil and that he sacrificed the cast of Glee to guarantee his continued success as a showrunner, even though he keeps making shows that suck ass. Once again, sorry to yuck your yum if you like it. It's just my personal opinion, and this is all just a joke anyway. I don't really believe in the devil. I don't really think that Ryan Murphy has a deal with the devil. Okay, it's a joke. But then, on October 13th, Netflix premiered a new series, and it's called The Watcher, and it's starring the myth, the legend, the icon, Jennifer Coolidge. And of course, it's created and produced by Ryan Murphy. But here's the thing, Watcher is based on a true story, and the events depicted therein happened in Westfield, New Jersey, which just so happens to be the town over from my hometown. And while yes, I am excited about it, and I hope Ryan and Satan worked extra hard on this one, I just wanted to pop in and share some creepy fun facts about the town where Watcher takes place. Now, we'll start with some brief history. The first colonizers came to the fields west of Elizabethtown in the mid-1600s. Before that, the rich fields and forests were the domain of the Lenni Lenape, and these lands were allegedly purchased from the native people in exchange for 2 guns, 2 kettles, 10 bars of lead, 20 handfuls of powder, and several hundred wampum beads. Now, obviously I'm side-eyeing this, but moving on. So one thing I've always loved about the county where I grew up is that the official seal depicts a murder. And that murder is the murder of Hannah Caldwell. Hannah was the wife of a respected Reverend minister, and the couple was very outspoken about their support for the revolution and their anti-British sentiments. And in 1780, Hannah was shot in her home by British soldiers in front of her 2 children and their live-in nanny. This murder further inflamed the Continental troops and is considered by many to be one of the pivotal moments in furthering the cause of the American Revolution. So Hannah's murder is infamous, but what many people don't know is that her husband, James Caldwell, the respected minister and outspoken rebel rouser, was actually murdered as well 18 months later. James's murder by an American sentry who was probably actually a British spy, it didn't happen in Westfield, but the trial did. The trial of James Morgan for the murder of James Caldwell happened in 1782 in the Presbyterian Church in Westfield. James Morgan was found guilty and he was hanged 8 days later at Gallows Hill because in Westfield there was an active execution site, and the area where this execution site was is now known as Gallows Hill Road. In fact, there's even rumors that there may have been a witch trial in Westfield in the 1600s, though no historical record exists of such an event. But in the 1920s, a businessman named Arthur Rule, who earned his fortune through the very real-sounding business of fruit distribution, he became obsessed with a home that was slated for demolition. This house, called Sitt Manor, was built in 1666. You got that right, 1666. And it had fallen into severe disrepair. But Rule purchased the home along with a major tract of land in Westfield. And not only did he restore the house, but he made it the crown jewel of the construction of a small community of houses. And he called this little community Witchwood. So basically what I'm saying is, this fruit distribution millionaire businessman became obsessed with the house, bought it, restored it, and then built houses around it that would accessorize it or accent it. And this insular community still exists in Westfield today. It's a little cluster of Tudor-style homes on Witchwood Road and Witchview Drive. And I've driven past this sign a million times. I've always loved the sign. And I've always liked to imagine that everyone who lives there is into dark magic. I mean, you'd have to be doing a little quid pro quo with Beelzebub in order to afford to live in a place like this. You know what I mean? Because that's the thing. Westfield is a very expensive place to live. I mean, we're talking multi-million-dollar homes, but these people are not the kind of rich that you're thinking of. They say money screams, but wealth whispers. And I'd say the people in Westfield meet those parameters. They're reserved, they're polite, but they don't want you looking too closely, you know what I mean? And it's this unspoken rule of keeping up appearances and the pressure of perfection that led to one of Westfield's greatest tragedies. In 1965, a man named John List purchased Breeze Knoll, a 19-room Victorian mansion at 431 Hillside Avenue in Westfield. He moved there with his family, which consisted of his wife, his 3 children, and his mother. Now, Liss was a successful accountant, the vice president and comptroller at a bank in Jersey City, and a malignant narcissist who held himself and everyone around him to an exacting level of perfection. So in 1971, when John lost his job at the bank, he couldn't just accept a lesser paid position elsewhere. That wasn't what he deserved. He deserved to be treated with respect. So instead of getting another job, he just pretended he didn't lose his job at all. And every day, John would get up and he'd go to the train station, where he'd sit for hours reading a newspaper until finally it was time to go home. And then he'd pretend he had a hard day, crunching numbers, or whatever the fuck a comptroller does. Because of course, he didn't tell his family that he'd lost his job. Why would they need to know that? But John couldn't pretend forever. Eventually it became clear that his family was going to find out the truth. And as late mortgage payments and unpaid bills piled up, John realized there was only one thing he could do: kill his entire family. Now, before you go thinking that this was a selfish action on John's part, oh nay nay, I'll have you know, John was actually doing his family a favor. See, John wrote up a very detailed letter explaining the reasons why his wife and children needed to die. And you know whose fault it really was? His wife and daughters, of course. See, John felt that his 16-year-old daughter, Patricia, was getting into witchcraft, and that his children should die before they were old enough to commit sins that might bar them from the kingdom of heaven. And like, even though it was gonna be super hard on him to slaughter his entire family one by one, he had to do it so that they could be saved. And in the execution of his crime, John was meticulous. On November 9th, 1971, he began the day by leaving a note for the milkman, canceling all future deliveries. Then he went into the kitchen and shot his wife Helen. He left her where she fell, and then he went upstairs to his mother's 3rd floor apartment. There he shot his mother, put her body into a carpet runner, and stashed her in the closet, as he was unable to carry her any further. Then Liss went back downstairs, and he dragged his wife's body into the ballroom. He placed her body in a Boy Scout sleeping bag on the floor, and then he attempted to clean up the trail of blood that he'd left through the house. Now, perhaps because she had a sense that her father was up to something, or maybe because of all the stress she was feeling, his 16-year-old daughter, Patricia, felt unwell at school, and John was called to come pick her up. John went to pick up Patricia, and he brought her back to the house. As she entered, John shot her in the back of the head, and then he dragged her to the ballroom and placed her in another sleeping bag. Now you may be wondering what a man does in the intermission between killing his entire family. And the answer, if you're John Liss, is you make a sandwich and you run some errands. So while waiting for his 2 sons to get home from school, John did some banking and mailed some letters, preparing for his getaway. Then he picked up his 13-year-old son Frederick from an after-school job. He brought Frederick home, and he shot him as soon as he entered the house. And then his body was placed in the ballroom beside his mother and sisters. Now everything had gone according to plan until John's 15-year-old son, John Jr., came home early from soccer practice. And John was caught surprised by this, so a struggle ensued. But John Sr. got the upper hand, and he shot his son 10 times. Liss then put his son in the ballroom alongside his wife and the other children. He draped towels over their faces and then straightened them out, like he wanted them to be tidy and perfect, even in death. John Liss then mailed a letter to his church's pastor. This letter was his confession, and it explained that his family was on the path to hell. His wife was no longer willing to go to church with him, and his daughter was interested in witchcraft. He wrote, "If any one of these had been the condition, we might have pulled through, but this was just too much. At least I'm certain that they have all gone to heaven now." He also requested that his family be cremated at a low cost, and he added this chilling postscript. P.S. Mother is in the hallway in the attic, 3rd floor. She was too heavy to move. Liss then called his children's school, saying they'd be gone for a while on a family trip to North Carolina. He ate dinner, and he slept in the billiard room because he's a bachelor now, baby. The next morning, he turned on all the lights in the house. He piped organ music through the house intercom system, and he left it playing at maximum volume. Then he left Westfield and disappeared. And John's preparation paid off. Even though Patricia had expressed to friends that her father was scaring her, no one suspected that the family had been murdered for some time. Patricia had even told her drama coach that if he heard anything about the family going away on vacation, it would mean that John had killed them all. But when the drama coach came to check on her, he drove past the house and saw all the lights on, and then he just drove off without investigating further. So in the ballroom she lay, beside her mother and brothers, for an entire month, while organ music played over the intercoms in the empty mansion. It wasn't until early December, when the light bulbs that had been left on began to burn out one by one, that the neighbors called the police to check on the lists. The cops arrived on December 7th, and they soon found the bodies of the List family in the ballroom. And because John wasn't And because John wasn't present among them, he soon became the prime suspect. But John List had disappeared. For nearly 20 years, John remained at large. Now, we're about to hear an armchair detective success story, because a man named Robert Clark lived in Colorado for some time, next door to a woman who is one of us. And in 1987, this woman happened to read a story about a family annihilator from a little town called Westfield, New Jersey. And she noticed that this man looked an awful lot like her neighbor, Robert Clark. And she noted the similarities, but she told herself, no, it couldn't be. She's just being paranoid. But then, in 1989, America's Most Wanted aired a segment about the List family murders. And this segment included a bust that was created to show the audience how John List might look 18 years after the murder of his family. And this segment also featured a criminal profiler who described some of the characteristics and habits that John List might exhibit under his new identity. And that same neighbor watched this segment, and she knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that her neighbor Robert Clark was really John List, family annihilator. And this time, she didn't talk herself out of it. Trust your gut, ladies. She called the show, and finally, John List was arrested. And at his trial, John List claimed that he sent his family to heaven by killing them, and that he felt terrible about doing it, but he couldn't just go and kill himself afterwards. You see, because suicide is an unforgivable sin, and he was hoping to meet his family in heaven someday. Because apparently, by John List's logic, committing multiple murders is a lesser sin than suicide. Actually, that's really a stunning glimpse into the narcissist mindset. Thinking you can just kill your whole family and God is cool with it, but he'd be like, super duper pissed about you offing yourself? Like, oh my god, no, how could you? You were my favorite, John List. John List. Flabby four-eyed cottage cheese ass comptroller. My greatest creation. Okay, enough about this self-involved slime. He died of pneumonia in prison, and good riddance. The home where the murders took place stood vacant for some time. Local teens would dare each other to trespass on the List property or break into the empty home. And for some reason, this fascinates me, because the 3 List children were local teens, so the kids breaking into the murder house probably knew them. There's something extra eerie about that. Like, I wonder if this made the spirits of the List children more likely to show up when their classmates came to visit them. And I'm totally not about to draft this as a YA novel, no way. Anyway, the beautiful Breeze Knoll mansion met its climactic conclusion in 1972, when it mysteriously burned down. A new house stands in its place now, but the List property remains a popular legend-tripping spot in the area. And the times I've visited it, I have to say, there's a stillness, an energy that feels like holding your breath, like the pause between cocking a hammer and striking a bullet. The tension there is palpable. But John List is not the only killer from Westfield. And the weird thing is, it seems like every murder that has happened in this upscale suburban town has been shockingly violent. I mean, I know murder is by nature violent, but these ones are disturbing. In 1959, Virginia Bailey became obsessed with the delusion that her 17-year-old son was afflicted with a terminal illness. Her son, a high school star athlete named Raymond Bailey III, had no known health issues at the time, but Virginia claimed that she didn't want her son to suffer, so she stabbed him to death in his second-floor bedroom in their home at 410 North Chestnut Street in Westfield. She then stabbed herself 36 times in a suicide attempt, but she survived. And at her trial, the jury deliberated for only 10 minutes before finding Virginia Bailey not guilty by reason of insanity. And in 1976, a woman named Lena Triano was found murdered in her home on Ripley Place in Westfield. She'd been hogtied with electrical cords cut out of her own appliances, assaulted, strangled with a tie from one of her bedroom blinds, and stabbed multiple times. But this brutal killing would remain unsolved for 36 years until a cold case unit tested fluids found on Lena's clothing and matched the DNA to a man who'd served time in prison for kidnapping and robbery. And it turned out that this man, Carlton Franklin, had been Lena's neighbor at the time of her murder. But the thing was, Franklin had only been 15 when he committed the crime. So in 2012, this 52-year-old man was tried as a juvenile for the murder of Lena Triano, and he ended up serving only 7 years of jail time for this sadistic murder. I don't know if you're seeing a pattern here, but what I see is that people are being killed in their homes by someone close to them, and that the perpetrator is evading a sentence for the crime, which is kind of an eerie coincidence if you ask me. And it's this violation of safety in the home that brings us to The Watcher. Now in 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus purchased 657 Boulevard, a 7-bedroom home built in 1905. But soon after closing on the $1.4 million sale, the family began receiving strange and ominous letters in their mailbox. But this video is already way too long, and I still have a couple weird Westfield facts to regurge on you little baby birds, so let me know if you want me to do a whole video just about The Watcher, because I could go into it. And I can tell you everything that Ryan Murphy got wrong, because of course I'm going to watch the show. He gets me every time. Now I got 2 more things to tell you, okay? That's it. Maybe I'll do more if I do another video about The Watcher. I have a lot to say about this freak town, so I just need to tell you 2 more things real quick, okay? So my favorite thing about Westfield is that it's actually the birthplace of Charles Addams, who's the cartoonist who created the Addams family. So Charles Addams was greatly influenced by many of the Victorian homes in the neighborhood. He based the goth aesthetic of his artwork on the old graveyards and stately architecture of his hometown. And it's said that he was particularly inspired by a house on Elm Street, and that as a teen, Charles was also obsessed with an abandoned house in Westfield, a crumbling Victorian home that he would get caught trespassing in several times. And while haunting his favorite abandoned house, Charles drew on the walls. When someone finally purchased the home and went to renovate it, they found an incredible life-size skeleton graffiti drawn by a teenage Charles Addams that thankfully was preserved. And nowadays, Westfield hosts an Addams Family Festival every year, and the Trader Joe's in town features a lot of Addams Family themed art on its signs. Now, Charles Addams had a favorite cemetery in town, the incredibly well-preserved burying ground at the center of town. It has some of the most beautiful headstones dating back to the 1700s, and they are in impeccable condition. And not only will you find tons of stunning headstones here, you'll also find one that is particularly macabre. And that's the grave of Boltus Roll. The grave of Boltus Roll reads as thus: in memory of Boltus Roll, who was murdered February 22nd, 1831, in the 62nd year of his age. Ye friends that weep around my grave, compose your minds to rest. Prepare with me for sudden death, and live forever blessed. And you're never gonna guess how my boy Boltus died, guys. Oh wait, did you guess that he was murdered in his home and that the perpetrator never came to justice? Okay. Then maybe you did get it. Because yes, this creepy headstone belongs to yet another victim killed in the comfort of their own home with yet another killer who never did a proper sentence for their crime. In fact, this crime was never solved at all. So to close this out, I just want to show you one of my favorite personal possessions, which is this incredible music box cigarette dispenser that my partner bought for me. Okay, ready? You can see in there. And yes, this is related because I named this little skeleton man Boltus Roll. And also, that sound, well, it sounded tragic. So I had this out for a Halloween party once, and some asshole broke it, kept playing with it, and now it makes this weird sound. Does anybody know anything about music boxes? You know what that, does it need like oil or something? How do I fix that? Anyway, Like I said, it is related because they named this little man Boltus Roll, and yes, that is a clove cigarette that he has. My little man came here to party, and no, I will not be taking questions at this time.